Child support is an important source of income for the millions of children living in single-parent households, especially those who are living in poverty. Nationwide, the child support program serves 1/5 of all U.S. children and 1/3 of all U.S. children in poor families, totaling 14.7 million children. I'd like to kick off our session today with a quick poll, which can be found directly underneath this video player on your screen. So at this time, if you can click poll number 1, and as results populate, you'll be able to see them come in on your screen. So what is your connection to child support? A, a personal involvement in a child support case. B, child of a child support order in your past. C, you have a professional connection to the child support system. D, 2 or more of, and E, none of the above.
Looks like folks are taking the poll, so I'll give it another minute for folks to answer. All right, thank you to everyone for taking the poll. It looks like 0% have personal involvement in a child support case, 13% are a child of a child support order, 38% have a professional connection to the child support system, 13% said 2 or more of the above, and 36% said none of the above. Thanks again for taking the poll. I'll pass it back to Sarah.
Great, and then let's take it a step further, and I'd like to ask you to type in the chat box to rate your experience with the child support system on a scale from 0 to 5, with 0 being an extremely negative experience with the child support system, and 5 being an extremely positive experience with the child support system, and everything in between. And Shannon, I think you're muted.
Thank you. I'm going to give folks another minute to submit their answers in the chat. Looks like folks are pretty quiet right now, but hopefully you'll get engaged as we keep going along. I'll pass it back to Sarah and we can keep moving forward.
On a scale of 0 to 5. So if you've had a negative experience with the child support system, type in 0, 3 is somewhere in between, and 5 would be an extremely positive experience.
Allison wrote that there's no personal connection to share. Appreciate you speaking up anyways.
Well, thank you all for joining us and engaging the poll activity with us. And I see we're being a little shy on the ranking, and that's fine. My name is Sarah Scherer, and I work on the Children and Families team at NCSL. And my colleague Shannon Saul, you just saw, covers child support and family law, family economic success, affordable housing and homelessness, including youth homelessness, and general human services topics for NCSL. And Shannon will be available during this session via the chat box, and she's going to share both of our contact information with you there in case you have questions on child support or any of these other topics I just mentioned. Before we get started today, I would just like to note a few housekeeping items. To the right of the video player, you will see tabs that say chat and Q&A. So if you want to ask our speakers a question later on in their presentation, please use the Q&A tab. If you see a question that you like, you can actually upvote that question using the up arrow, and we'll prioritize those questions that have been upvoted. So please ask questions and vote for questions that you would like to have asked. And we've allocated the last 10 minutes of this presentation for your questions. So if we don't get to your question today, please reach out to Shannon and I, and we will definitely get an answer to your question. When you do ask a question, be sure to write your full name and state in the nickname box, which will pop up. It'll prompt in the chat as soon as you click. And you can expand the video player to full screen by clicking on the arrows at the bottom right of the player window. Our speaker bios are right below, and the resources as well are right below the video player. If you're unable to watch any portion of this live session, your registration includes access to all the sessions in NCSL's Policy 101. And you can rewatch any session until March 26th. And if at any time you need technical help, use the help button at the bottom right of the page. So today our speakers are from the Office of Child Support Enforcement, OCSE, and OCSE provides support for NCSL's work on child support and the work we at NCSL do for all of you as legislators and legislative staff on child support. NCSL also has a child support tutorial, so a child support 101 tutorial, also located in the resources section just below the speaker bios. And this is a self-guided tutorial that you can take at any time at your own pace on all child support topics it's very broad, so it's comprehensive, easy to follow with tabs, and you can go right into the aspect of child support that you would like to learn about right there on the child support tutorial webpage. And I believe Shannon is also going to place a link to the child support tutorial in the chat as well. So please reach out with any questions you might have on that. And before we get started, I just want to give you 5 reasons to pay attention. So 1, child support is an evergreen topic. It's not a headliner, but it is fundamental to child and family well-being. It can be used to strengthen family economic security and mobility. It can enhance child development, and it increases employment among parents paying the child support. In fact, child support payments represent on average 50% of income for poor custodial families who receive it, and lifted nearly 700,000 people out of poverty in 2019. So it's one reason to pay attention. 2, states are increasingly adopting child support policies that encourage and support employment among non-custodial parents. 3, states can leverage federal funding. And 4, you may have already or soon will be receiving calls from constituents or emails from parents involved in the child support system. I know at NCSL we receive those same calls from your constituents. So don't be surprised if you have already or soon receive those direct calls from your constituents about child support. And finally, there are penalties for federal non-compliance. So now I'm going to turn it over to our speakers today. Melissa Johnson is the director of the Division of Regional Operations for the Office of Child Support Enforcement, and she oversees more of the hands-on work that OCSC does with states. As you'll learn later, each state and tribal program has a regional program specialist assigned to it, and Melissa oversees those program specialists. And Melissa was also formerly the deputy director in the Kansas 4D program. And then we have Yvette Riddick. She's the director of the Division of Policy and Training at the Office of Child Support Enforcement, and she has a long history in federal child support policy, oversight, and leadership. So together they make a great combination of both policy and practice expertise. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our presenters.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Sarah, for that great introduction and the poll as we get started on child support. It's not just what you think. Yvette and I want to thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we look forward to a conversation and maybe some great questions at the end of our presentation. So I just wanted to highlight a few of the topics that we'll be covering today. We will go over what the child support program is about, our basic operations, and then we'll also highlight some of the enforcement tools that happen both at a state and federal level. I'll talk about how the child support program gets funded, what cases make up the child support program, and we'll hit on a little bit about that incentives and penalties that Sarah mentioned. We'll wrap it up with some of the challenges facing our child support program today and a little bit of good news with best practices at the end. So we look forward to taking this journey with you today.
Good afternoon, everybody. The first slide that we're showing you are the statutes and regulations, the U.S. Code, the Social Security Act, and our federal regulations. I wanted to point out to you that the Social Security Amendments of 1975 established the federal child support program. And where all that is in Title IV, Part D of the Social Security Act. Hence, that's why we call it the 4D program, or we call them 4D cases. Many people don't necessarily know where 4D comes from, but it is Part D, sections 451 through 469B of the Social Security Act. So what is the child support program? OCSC, when we say OCSC, we're referring to the Federal Office of Child Support Enforcement, and it's part of the Administration for Children and Families, which is housed within the Department of Health and Human Services. OCSC is a federal agency that oversees the National Child Support Program, and it also services the U.S. Central Authority, which is conducting of international cases, which I'll talk about a little bit later. What's important to know is that the program is established in 50 states and 4 jurisdictions. The 4 jurisdictions, in addition to the 50 states, are the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, and Guam. We also have 60 tribal child support programs as well. We started with 12, or I think maybe 9, and we've gone up to 60, so we're really proud of that. And each of the programs does have their own unique laws and procedures, even though they need to follow certain federal procedures. Most of the programs are run by human service programs at the state level, often with help from prosecuting attorneys and other law enforcement officials. At the federal level, you will see that we support the states quite a bit, and one of the biggest supports that we provide is the operation of the Federal Parent Locator Service. So our mission, these 5 functions have been established from the very beginning: locating parents, establishing paternity, establishing support obligations, monitoring and enforcing obligations, and dispersing and distributing collections. What I do want to note, however, is that the program has been in existence for more than 40 years. And since the beginning, when our main mission was enforcement of child support orders, we have really broadened out so that we also provide other significant services that we will talk about later. Today, the program is much more focused on making it more family holistic, and we have activities that support that and that support the fathers so they can succeed and help support their children.
All right, and now we have another poll. So if you can click on poll number 2 on your screen. This one's sort of a pop quiz because I mentioned the answer earlier, but how many people were lifted above poverty in 2019 by child support payments?
I'll give folks just a few more moments to answer that question. It's a tricky one. It looks like, oh, people are still answering. I'll give it another minute. All right, so 70% of folks said 500,000 and 30% of folks said 700,000. The other 2 answers didn't have any responses. So the correct response is 700,000. So maybe a little bit more than most of you might have thought coming into this.
Thank you, Shannon and Sarah, for the pop quiz on a Friday afternoon. So I wanted to share a little bit more on some of the statistics for our child support program. This flyer can be found on our website, but it shares some data from 2019. As you can see, we do have a large impact with $32.4 billion collected in child support in just one fiscal year. 75% of those collections came through income withholding, and Yvette will speak later on the importance of income withholding and partnership with employers. We do note that 96% of those collections went directly to the family, and only 4% was retained to reimburse public assistance. I'd also like to point out the caseload comparison. Child support is third and only to Medicaid and SNAP for the number of children served, with 14.3 million. And our total caseload is around 13.6 million. I'll speak later to cost effectiveness because you'll hear about that a lot from child support directors in your states, but right now nationally we're at $5.06. So how's the child support program funded? It is funded with both state and federal dollars. It is a federal state matching grant program under which states must spend a little bit of money to receive the federal funding. The federal government reimburses each state 66% of all allowable expenditures on child support activities. And this requirement is open-ended, meaning there's no upper limit or ceiling on how much the federal government will match for child support expenditures. There are also 3 additional streams beyond that 34-66 state federal split, and those include states that collect child support on behalf of families that currently or formerly receive TANF assistance, also to reimburse themselves for the cost of this TANF cash payment. This is often referred to as the state retained collection, which I just mentioned on the last slide was only 4% of the total collections in fiscal year 19. The next one is that the federal government provides states with incentive payments to encourage them to operate programs. And I'll touch on incentive payments on another slide later in this presentation to explain how much it is and how those can be used. And finally, states do also collect fees and costs from families that are not on welfare assistance that may help finance the child support program.
Okay, so up next, we have a true or false question. And if you could just type your answers in the chat. True or false, in order to receive child support enforcement services, the family must have an open temporary assistance for needy families or TANF public assistance case. True or false? Comment in the chat.
We've got 1 false. Another false. We've got 3 falses so far. Got another false. It looks like many folks know their stuff. That answer to that question is false.
Thank you, Shannon and Sarah, for another chance to test our knowledge. So as I mentioned on the prior slide, there were over 13 million cases in the child support caseload. So let's talk about how that caseload gets made up. And the first thing that I really want you to take away is that the child support program has no eligibility requirements. Our caseload gets built upon 2 streams of cases. And the first is through applications. Parties that would apply do not have to have any income or eligibility requirements. Both custodial and non-custodial parents can apply for services. There may be an application fee set up by the states that cannot exceed $25 if those families are not receiving any public assistance. Many states have chosen to absorb this application fee cost. The second way that cases come into our caseload is by referrals. So the referrals are often from TANF, 4E foster care, and the Medicaid program. The recipients of these benefits are referred to child support and they receive child support services at no cost. States can also choose to pass legislation making additional programs mandatory for sending a referral to child support. Some of those other programs that states have chose to make mandatory include SNAP and child care.
So, states are required to have state plans that indicate that they are in compliance with federal statutes. States must have state plans in order to receive funding for the TANF program. So it's really important for the states to be in compliance with the federal statutes. In addition to the 5 functions that I mentioned in the mission statement, there are other requirements as well. And there's many, but I picked the ones that I thought you would be interested in. These are statewide operations. The child support program must operate statewide. State financial participation. The state must agree that it will participate financially, the 34% that we were just talking about. The child support program needs to be a single and separate organizational unit within the state. And for states that work with courts and law enforcement and others, they must establish cooperative agreements with those entities. I mentioned earlier that we have a federal parent locator service. Each state is required to have a state parent locator service that feeds information into the federal parent locator service. Each state must also have child support guidelines, and those guidelines really vary depending on state to state. And another one I wanted to mention was the willingness and the requirement to report fiscal data to OCSC. So I mentioned that OCSC is the U.S. Central Authority for International Child Support Cases. And we basically joined the 2000 Hague Child Support Convention back in 2016. We are in partnership with the State Department on this and work with the State Department closely to run this program. Right now, the convention is established in 37 countries. And in addition to that, we have treaty relationships that we call federal bilateral reciprocal arrangements with 4 additional countries that are not part of the convention, and with 12 of the provincial entities that are in Canada. I just want to mention here, and I'll probably mention it several times, is that the OCSC website is very, very robust. And if you're ever interested in international child support, the states do process the cases, but we provide technical assistance to those states. And within the website, there is a whole huge section on international child support if you ever need that information.
So Sarah mentioned that I oversee the Division of Regional Operations, so it makes sense that I'm going to tell you about how our regions are structured. HHS is split across 10 different regional offices. We have staff in each regional office, and they provide guidance and technical assistance to our states, territories, and tribes within each regional boundary. They serve as that first point of contact to the grantees, and this is likely who has the day-to-day contact with the child support directors in your states and territories. I did include in the slides when you received them a link at the bottom, which houses contact information for each regional program manager if it's needed. We have 54 states and territories, as Yvette mentioned. We also have the federally recognized tribe and tribal organizations, and they operate across our country. I'm not going to go in detail over these next few slides, but I wanted to provide them to you as a reference because it lists out each state and tribe in each of our regional offices that you'll have for your information. Yvette, I think
Yvette, you're muted.
I'm going to talk for a few minutes about the Federal Parent Locator Service, which is a huge database. And you'll see that in the diagram that's offered to you, we have the National Directory of New Hire, and we have the Federal Case Registry. Underneath the National Directory of New Hire, we have 3 different areas that we get our information from. So we have the new hire data, the quarterly wage data, and the unemployment data. And I will talk about each of those briefly so that you have a sense of what they are. The new hire data is information that holds information on all newly hired employees, and it includes identifying information about the employee, the employer who hired the employee, and the date of hire. Employers are required to submit this information to the State Directory of New Hires. So here, states are also required to have a State Directory of New Hires that feeds the information into the National Directory of New Hires. The quarterly wage data is information on individual employees that come from the records of the state workforce agencies and federal agencies. The quarterly wage data includes identifying information about the employees, the employer who they're reporting to, and the actual amount of their quarterly wages. This information is done in quarters in which wages were paid. The unemployment data contains unemployment insurance information on individuals who have received or applied for unemployment benefits, what the amount of that employment benefit is, and the calendar quarter in which the unemployment claim was filed. This is information that the state workforce agencies are required to give to us. And that data is given to the National Directory of New Hires within 1 month at the end of the calendar quarter. Going back to the Federal Case Registry, which is on the other side of the National Directory of New Hires in your diagram. The Federal Case Registry is a database of all 4D child support cases and participants and non-4D cases and participants from all the states and territories. The Federal Case Registry, or the FCR as we call it, helps custodial parents in locating people for child support purposes. For example, a caseworker can find out if a particular individual is in another state, and it helps them to determine where they are. It's also used to enforce state laws on parental kidnapping and on child custody or visitation situations. States send the information to their state case registry, which of course gets sent to the Federal Case Registry. So what happens here, we have a state parent locator service, we have a state directory of new hires, we have a state case registry, and all of that information gets sent to the federal parent locate system. So it all ends up with us at OCSC. Wanted to talk for just a minute that not only do we provide technical assistance and training, but we also have some tools for actually supporting federal administered support collections. We have the federal tax refund offset, which is our second largest collection of money next to income withholding. And just to give you an example, I pulled up the figure that's been out published, and the collections between 1982 to 2018 was $45.7 billion. So it is a very important enforcement remedy. We also have passport denial. And for cases that meet that criteria, those are cases where the child support arrearage is $2,500 or more. That information gets certified and shared with the State Department. What happens then is if someone wants to have a passport, it can be denied. And in certain situations, if we can physically obtain the passport, the Department of State can also revoke, restrict, or limit a passport previously issued to such an individual. We have a whole unit within OCSC that works on passport denial and works those cases individually when needed. The administrative offset is a program that is optional, but it helps states collect past due support through interception of certain federal payments. So what are we talking about when we're talking about federal payments? We're talking about money that's intercepted, which includes payments to private vendors that might have worked with the federal government and were being paid by the federal government. It could be federal retirement benefits, and it could be payments of attorney's fees where they were paid to a plaintiff who prevails in litigation against the US government. We have the insurance match, and between 2007 and 2018, we collected about $10.3 million, but that is a voluntary reporting. And so that was only 16 states. So the figure is definitely much higher than that. And the insurance match is a data match between a central repository of insurance claims maintained by an organization on behalf of thousands of insurers and the claims maintained, and the OCSC data file, which is a national repository of all of the NCPs. When I say NCP, I mean non-custodial parent, who have past due support. Finally, we have the multi-state financial institution data match, which we call MS-FIDM. And that is also a match between MS-FIDM and OCSC data file. And the MS-FIDM institutions have the option to match through the MS-FIDM or through individual states that they do business with. In fiscal year 2017, approximately $122 million was collected as a result of MS-FIDM.
Thank you, Yvette. So one of the topics that often state legislators may hear from the child support directors is about their state child support system. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time touching on this. The state and federal child support programs work together to implement state information systems that support automated program management. Each state and territory must have an automated system to operate its child support program efficiently and effectively. As I covered, these systems distribute $3.2 billion annually. They also interface with so many data sources at the state and the federal level, as Yvette's just talked about. These systems must ensure the storage of the best information on locate. What are the active benefits for parties? Are there any protective factors because of domestic violence? Employment sources, employment beginning and ending dates, what payments have been received, who payments are owed to, payment records, and those arrears calculations. As you can tell, systems are a large expense, but it's an imperative that all this information comes together for the delivery of support to the families and the 14.3 million children. So states were required to implement child support systems more than 20 years ago. Most of those systems at the time were on mainframes and used a different type of coding than what you might find today. This chart shows activities across many of the states to modernize their child support systems. I'll go through each column briefly. Some of the states are choosing the second column, which is to re-platform. This means they're moving their platform to a new platform or operating system, often with a code translation to a more modern version. Some states have chose column 3, which is custom off the shelf, also referred as COTS. Others have chose to transfer a system that was completed and certified from another state and just make specifications for their own laws and policies. Those states choosing the transfer option are in this column 4 right here. Next, some states have decided they can do it better and they have chose to build it from scratch. And you can see 3 states in that column 5 that have chose to build from scratch. A handful have looked at all these options and chosen a hybrid in column 6. And only 3 of our states have been able to be incorporated into the state's enterprise system. The bottom row does indicate the states that are in the process of a feasibility study to modernize, or they're looking to start a feasibility study. And I just want to mention that OCSC worked with the state directors recently to streamline that feasibility process. So OCSC approves a process that's got planning and design. It certifies compliance with all the requirements and monitors the system as it's implemented. We understand the responsibility that the funds, which are a lot for new systems, are wisely invested and critical component for operations. This new guidance helps states to determine the best course for system modernization that's most effective, efficient, and cost reasonable.
We wanted to have a slide on employers because they are an important partner to us. They're essential because, as we mentioned earlier, they account for 75% of child support and medical support collections through payroll deductions. And we really appreciate their contribution to ensure financial stability for children and families. Within the federal office of OCSC, we have an employer service team that works just on this area and also works with the American Payroll Association and employers to support them. So, in conjunction with the payments being made through income withholding, states are required to have a state disbursement unit. And all payments made through income withholding must be processed through the SDU. The reason this was established is before the SDU and before the employers had one point of remittance of payments, they would have to figure out all of these different addresses that they had to send the income withholding to. So for each state that has an SDU, regardless of whether the income withholding is for a 4D case or for a non-4D case, it goes through that state's SDU. And then the SDUs distribute all the payments within 48 hours of receipt. That is for all payments except for tax refund offset payments, which have a different rule.
All right, and now we have another poll, and it coincides, it looks like, with a question we have received as well on what collection tools are under state control. So this will answer that question as well. If you'll click on the third poll underneath the video player, and this poll is, what are some tools states have to collect child support from parents? And we'll give you a moment to answer this poll.
Give it another moment. I still see some responses coming in. All right, so it looks like 33% of folks said, sorry, it's changing. 30% of folks said an income withholding order. 10% said license restrictions. Nobody picked property seizure or liens, garnishments, and levies. And 60% of folks said all of the above. So 60% of folks know their stuff and know what they're talking about. I'll turn it back over to you all to go into more depth on that.
So there are state administered support collection tools as well. We have the state tax refund offset, which is similar to the federal tax refund offset. We have income withholding orders, which of course are mandatory. And then the states are required to have state law and procedures on many of these particular enforcement remedies, but they have discretion on how they implement them. And they include liens and garnishment and levies, property seizure, restriction or revocation of professional, drivers, or recreational licenses and vehicle registration, and U.S. attorney referrals for criminal prosecution.
So I talked about the incentive measures and incentives that are given to states just a little bit earlier, and I teased that we'd be coming back to that. So the Child Support Program has a strong outcome-based performance management system that was established by the Child Support Performance and Incentive Act of 1998. Our states are measured in 5 program areas: paternity establishment, support order establishment, current support collections, cases paying towards arrears, and cost effectiveness. This performance-based incentive and penalty program is used to reward states for good and improved performance and to impose penalties when states fall below specific levels. I won't go over each of the performance levels, but you can see the national performance on your slide. I do want to highlight, though, that cost effectiveness, the program collects $5.06 for every dollar spent. So you might be thinking, well, how much are these incentive payments? So in fiscal year 19, the estimated fund available to be split among the states was $496 million. It is quite a large pot of money. The incentives are estimated based at the start of the fiscal year and reported by the states quarterly. And then we do adjustments after the actual incentives are computed at the end, after the end of the fiscal year, and make adjustments. It's important to note that there are no matching federal funds for the incentives. States can't use the incentives as their 34% share to draw down the 66%. So how can a state spend the money? State incentives are required to be used and reinvested into the child support program. They can't be used and available for any other state operations. States have to use these incentives to supplement and not supplant other funds, so they can't reduce their expenditures as a result of the receipt of these incentive payments. But it's important to note that while the normal 4D expenditures have to meet within certain regulatory approved items, states can seek an exemption to use the funds for incentives for expenses that are not normally reimbursed under the 4D program. Some of those examples we've placed on the slide do include using incentive funds for fatherhood programs, education and jobs programs that target non-custodial parents, mediation, couples counseling, and programs for targeting incarcerated or even putative fathers.
So I think it's important to point out that OCSC does have an Office of Audit that evaluates the completeness, reliability, and security of performance indicator data reported by the states and the accuracy of the reporting systems used in calculating the performance indicators at least once every 3 years, better known as data reliability audits or DRAs. OCSC also performs financial management audits, and the Social Security Act gives the Secretary authority to perform other audits of state 4D programs. I want to note that each year we provide an annual, what we call a DCL or Dear Colleague letter, and the current DCL is for year 2011, 20 number 11, so it's DCL 2011, and it's titled Data Reliability Audit Requirements for Fiscal Year 2020. All of our Dear Colleague letters are posted on the website, and we've also provided you a link in the resources for that. In addition, if you really want to dive into how the audits work, DCL 0402, which was issued in 2004, explains the frequency and the type of audits that are done and when the types of audits a state or territory will receive. And that too is in your resources. So as was mentioned, we have the incentives and we have the audits. We also have penalties. States are subject to financial penalties for failing to meet the 4D requirements that are set forth in this particular regulation that I've posted here. These financial penalties are applied against the state's TANF grant. In other words, the penalties are attributed to the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families grant, and of particular, and so the actual state must expend additional funds to replace any reduction due to the financial penalty. There is a corrective action period for approximately a year to take care of perhaps correcting that and before the penalties are assessed. We'll talk a little bit more. Melissa will talk a little bit more later, more specifically about some of the challenges that we have in our program. But a particular concern right now is that we have a paternity establishment percentage which is declining as a result of COVID. As you can imagine, with a lot of offices closed, courts closed, in-hospital paternity establishment closed, we are eyeing the percentage closely, and we fear that there is going to be a decline as a result of the COVID pandemic, which could result in some states getting the penalty in this area as a result of this. We are working to assist the states in the best way we can at this point in figuring out how we can assist them in that particular area.
Thank you, Yvette, for the perfect lead into our challenges discussion. And I think we can all agree that no conversation about challenges in the past year is complete without having COVID-19 at the very top of it. Due to the exceptional and devastating impacts of the pandemic, our state and tribal agencies that operate child support programs have faced significant operational and other challenges in providing the child support services that are so critical. For example, parents may be temporarily unable to come to a child support office if the offices are closed. So scheduling and changing to have intake interviews done virtually. Or for a while, genetic tests may have stopped, or trying to get genetic testing completed now may be a bit of a challenge. Agency staff are maybe working from home, and courts in many jurisdictions suspended certain child support proceedings as they focused on critical proceedings such as criminal and child welfare. And many of the courts now are moving to more virtual proceedings or have a reduced workload. Another challenge is about independent contractors. As you may be aware, the independent contractors are not treated the same as a normal employee. They don't receive the same benefits. And presently, there's no federal legislation that requires reporting these independent contractors to that National Directory of New Hire that Yvette spoke of. That National Directory of New Hire is so important because it lets the child support community know of wages so that we can set appropriate child support orders. It lets us know that there's new employment so that income withholding order can be automatically issued by those essential child support systems. So without having independent contractors reported, that prevents all of that action. Some states have chose to pass legislation that would require reporting of independent contractors in their states, just like a full-time employee. We've also seen as the gig economy has grown, many of the employees in that economy are classified as independent contractors, thus, again, outside of some of this critical reporting. Another challenge that our program faces is that we live in a mobile society. We call those cases intergovernmental cases, and that's when individuals move from one state to another, trying to keep track of where they're at. If a child support proceedings need to move to another state, or if enforcement actions need to happen now in a new state, our child support programs have to have excellent communication from state to state to effectively follow the individuals and enforce these obligations. The next one I wanted to touch on is about interest, and this is entirely led by state legislation and state statute. The charging of interest has been a topic for many years because research has shown the growing negative impact on high child support arrears to non-custodial parents. And we have seen some state legislation in recent years that have sought to either reduce the amount of interest being charged or to completely eliminate it. But I would say states still do charge interest, and some of them might be up to an amount of 12%. And the last challenge I want to mention that we are still working through is that states are seeing a decline in their caseload. Many factors have fed into this situation, such as the reduction in TANF rolls in the state that resulted in reduced referrals into the program, or maybe less parents that are applying for services. They may not be aware that there's no eligibility requirements and that they can apply for these services. OCSC is in the middle of a 2-year discretionary grant that focuses on how we can digitally market the program and look at new ways to reach out and share information. Other states have also been in conversations recently about whether there's ways to make their program be more opt-out rather than opting in. So you may hear some of these conversations from your state child support directors.
We wanted to end on a good note, and there are best and emerging practices. As I had mentioned towards the beginning of this presentation, while enforcement of child support is certainly one of our principal missions, there are other things that we are working on to make things more holistic and better for everyone. And the first one is the use of procedural justice principles and practices to increase voluntary compliance. This is a very well-researched approach that's used by the courts and the police to increase voluntary compliance. OCSC has funded 6 demonstration projects to test use of these principles to reduce the need for punitive compliance measures. While this experiment is not, well, I shouldn't say it's an experiment, well, while this research has not finished yet, all the signs indicate that this is really going to help us. And examples of states that are going through the use of the procedural justice principles include Michigan, Ohio, and Arizona. I also mentioned earlier that we have more concern now for non-custodial parents. And we want them to be, for those who are unemployed or underemployed, that we want to help them in providing employment services. And the examples of states where we are doing some of this work is Texas, Wyoming, and Colorado. And we have actually supported this activity through various means by using Title 4D funding, providing waivers, and to use the funding to match states with private contributions. We also have a project called Knowledge Works, and that is an online toolkit that states can use to provide states with examples of best practices. And again, that is on our website for those of you who would like to see this toolkit and how it's used for this. Another area is domestic violence, expert-informed processes to increase safe access to child support for domestic violence victims. Within OCSC, we have a domestic violence expert that works with domestic violence organizations and with states in providing them technical assistance and providing safer access to child support services for victims of domestic violence. And examples here include Wisconsin, New York, and Missouri. Finally, we have integrating parenting time services into the child support program to operate and promote healthy co-parenting. In the past, sometimes we or child support programs would get complaints about the non-custodial parent making payments, but not being able to have parenting time with their children. And we recognize that that is a very important area. So we have helped states more directly connect access and visitation services to parents with a special focus on developing parenting time orders. Multiple states, such as here we have Tennessee, Virginia, and Indiana, use funds for remote mediation, legal services, and parenting time orders. We've also funded technical assistance for parenting time in demonstration grants, which has led to ongoing implementation of integrating parenting time services into child support orders. And with that, I think that's our last slide. And for more information, what we've done here is we've provided the DRO email, the Division of Regional Operations, and the Division of Policy and Training. These are emails where we monitor the emails every single day. Well, not every single day, at least 5 days a week. And when we get a question or whatever, it gets sent to the person or the subject matter expert who can actually answer that question. So we really actually will be more than happy to answer any questions you have, whether it's a question of your own or something that your constituents are looking for. And I just want to add that Melissa and I are really honored to be able to do this presentation, and that we have a lot of love for the child support program. We've both been in it for a while, and it's really quite a cause, and we are here to help you in whatever way we can.
Great. Thank you, Yvette and Melissa. And we just wanted to point out that as you learn more about child support, and if you're interested in connecting with the child support network in your state, please reach out to us at NCSL and we can help make those connections. And there's also many opportunities that you can engage in your states. You can meet with your state child support director. You can meet with your judicial representatives, sign up for NCSL's Children, Youth, and Families monthly newsletter. You can watch for additional learning opportunities on child support, as well as other topics that we cover. You can sign up for OCSC's newsletter directly, and of course, share all of the resources below with your colleagues and other staffers and legislators in your state. And as we've mentioned before and can't mention enough, contact NCSL with any requests for research or technical assistance, and Shannon and I would be happy to assist you. We also wanted to share, and we put them in the chat below, but I think Shannon's going to share her screen and we're going to show you all the child support tutorial that we mentioned. I know we got a question from Martin on whether or not we had an NCSL resources on the basics of child support. So Shannon's going to show that child support tutorial. And it looks like she's already showing that. So this was most recently updated just a few days ago. And if you scroll down, you can see that it's set up in an accordion style fashion with 8 chapters, child support basics, and then the specifics on state administration. As Melissa and Yvette talked about, there's a tab on locating a parent, establishing paternity, as we've covered, establishing, modifying child support orders, and collecting and distributing the child support, and of course, child support enforcement and enforcement monitoring. As you can see, the very last tab will, I believe, hopefully be a recording of this session if you wanted to rewatch the session again. And also below the screen, there is the PowerPoint slides. I know we got a question on the PowerPoint slides. So those are below this video player. They're not on the child support tutorial, but they are below the video player if you wanted to click through the slides again. And then Shannon, if you want to share the child support and family law legislation database, this tracks all introduced child support and family law legislation. And you can find a link to this in the chat. It's also down below in the resources. You can just Google child support and family law legislation database. And I believe we're the first one that pops up, if not the only one. I would assume we're probably the only one. And then if you scroll down, you can see that we cover a multitude of topics on prevention, custody and visitation, grandparent visitation, domestic violence is covered in the family violence collaboration. We get a lot of questions on parental rights and sexual assault, so you'll find those bills tracked in that. We call them tags or topic. There's the whole range of bills and different topics on child support are covered. I believe back through 2012, if you click on the year, 2012, yeah. So all introduced legislation on child support and family law, and Shannon and I actually do the tracking for that database. So if you notice a bill missing, feel free to email us, but we try to stay on top of it and get everything populated in there for you guys. So those are those 2 resources. And there's more resources on the child support tutorial webpage that we showed. And so now, let's see, we did have another question from Rhonda. What can state agencies do if a parent can't pay child support because he or she is employed? I know you kind of talked about this, Yvette, in your best and emerging practices discussion, but if one of you wants to take a stab at this question a little deeper.
And Sarah, was it if the parents are unemployed?
Yes.
So I think the first thing that many steps do in their assessment of the case and their intervention options is if they can determine what is the reason for the unemployment. Is somebody just willfully unemployed and not choosing to be employed? Or is somebody have other issues that might be disability or mental health issues that may be preventing some of the employment? So they really do have most states have a tailored view at what is the appropriate enforcement remedy before they go through and just immediately start on one. They will assess what's going on with the case. And it depends. Some have partnerships with employment services, like Yvette mentioned. So they may have specialized child support courts, and they may also make referrals over for employment services or other services that have been determined that a parent might need as they work towards getting that payment. Ultimately, there are still sometimes happening across the country contempt for non-payment for those parents that just willfully refuse to be employed and have no reason to avoid the employment.
And you touched on employment services again, and Jonathan was asking if you all could give some more specific examples of employment services that states implement.
Let's see. So OCSC has supported these efforts through demonstration grants, and we provide funding and waivers to allow states to use the Title IV-D funding to match state and private donations, and by developing the online kit with examples of best practices and models for replication and ongoing coaching and technical assistance. I don't have a specific example right this minute, but our toolkit on our website would provide those. And if I could add to what Melissa just said about the not paying, there is a big difference between the willingness, willfully not paying, but we also recognize that there are situations where someone has a disability or cannot pay because of particular circumstances. One of the reasons for the state child support guidelines is to assess the case and determine what a fair obligation is. And one of our philosophical points is that orders should be set based on ability to pay. And I want to mention that ability to pay is one of the criteria that we look at.
And you can also search employment services in our legislation in our database. So you can find some more examples in NCSL's bill tracking database that we just shared with you, and find ways that states have implemented employment services such as job training or technical training, et cetera. You can find specific state examples in our state legislation database. And I think that was all the questions from the audience. So if anyone has any questions right now, feel free to.
We actually have one more question.
Okay, go ahead.
Cindy was asking, do states ever forgive past due child support?
Yes, states, some of the states across our country do have arrears compromise or debt compromise and arrears forgiveness type policies. Oftentimes those policies really focus on that piece of support that may be due and owing that was going to be retained by the state. So I touched on that 4% of the collections are retained by the state as the repayment for assistance that was provided out. And that happens when a custodial parent might be on TANF. And so the collections during that time period might be retained by the state. So most of the forgiveness policies really focus on that money that would be retained normally by the state. We do have some information on our website. It's a little bit outdated. I'll be honest, it's one of my projects we're working to update, but each state's child support program usually has information on their child support websites about what is their arrears forgiveness policies.
And there's also some information in the NCSL child support tutorial on arrears compromise. So you can check there as well. Any more questions from the audience at this time? If not, I was just going to ask each of our presenters to give us 1 or 2 takeaways for new legislators and legislative staff. 1 or 2 takeaways.
I'll go first, Yvette. I would just say my biggest takeaway is number 1, remembering the child support programs there. As Sarah touched on, it is an evergreen topic, but a lot of times it's not a headline topic. But I hope you take away from today that there are 14.3 million children impacted, and we do process over $32 billion, and how this can really help the families in your states. And so I really hope that that's the takeaway as you interact and hear about the child support program in your state.
I think that my comment is similar. When I talk with people outside of my work at OCSC, I'm really surprised on how many people don't realize that OCSC is not necessarily just focused on the TANF program. That has changed many, many, many years ago. And I know of individuals who spend lots and lots and lots of money on private attorneys. And we have lots of enforcement remedies within the child support program, such as the federal tax refund offset and other things, and that states have, that are really effective enforcement remedies for collections, in addition to services for cases with special needs, such as the emerging practices that I shared. So I would encourage you to identify the child support program as a possible remedy for those who really need that service.
Great, thank you both. And if there's no more questions from the audience, I'd just like to close out our session today by thanking our panelists, Yvette and Melissa, as well as all of you for taking the time out of your Friday to learn about child support. Please don't hesitate to reach out to NCSL, Shannon and I on child support for any additional information. And thank you all for joining us. Please check out our other State Policy 101 sessions occurring the last 2 Fridays in February as well. Thank you.